Hi, how's everyone doing tonight or this morning, depending on where you're at? We're really excited to have you join us for the Penn State New Music Festival and Symposium. This has been a really exciting day, and we're in the middle of the final concert of the first day of the festival, and tomorrow we have two more concerts and two more research presentations. So it's been a really exciting time so far, getting to watch research presentations today and hear two wonderful concerts throughout the day. So thanks for if you're at home tuning in, thank you very much, and thanks for our guest composers for being here with us tonight. I'm going to just say a few words about the festival and kind of how this came to be. Then we're going to have a little chat with the composers here. First, back in June or so, we launched a call for scores and a call for proposals for research presentations to have a new music festival here at Penn State. We didn't know, like many people, what things would look like that at the time, whether this would be a completely virtual festival or in person or what was going to happen, but we were determined to kind of move forward with this plan of having the festival and trying to make it work. And as you can see, we've done that. We received 535 submissions to the festival from all over the world. And as you can imagine, that was quite overwhelming. It was a huge response. And we were really excited to get to know works and research by so many different people around the world. We devised 20 different panels of people who divided up and reviewed the submissions depending on the category that they were submitted to. And it took months. It took months to get down to figure out a combination of pieces that folks liked, pieces that we could perform, and pieces that we would be allowed to perform. So that third part was a new piece of the puzzle. What pieces are we actually allowed to perform safely in the middle of this pandemic? What can we put together that that adheres to all the guidelines, safety guidelines, and so forth at Penn State and in Pennsylvania? So we've done that, and what you're seeing is the combination of all those things. So we've had day one of the festival, and day two is tomorrow. The festival consists of 4 research presentations and 4 concerts total. So you'll be able to find the program booklet and the program for tonight's concert on the live stream webpage. And I hope you get a chance to check that out and read the bios of the composers and program notes for the pieces. And all of the events are open to anyone, anywhere. So you just click on the link and you join us. So we have one of our many safety measures that we have is that we can only perform music for 30 minutes at a time in a space, and also up to a certain capacity. So tonight's concert, we realized, well, we're going to have 30-minute slot where we can have music, and then the recital hall is going to be empty for 30 minutes, and then we're going to have a 30-minute slot again. And rather than those who are tuning in to just look at our recital hall, which is a beautiful recital hall, and you might want to look at it for 30 minutes, but rather than just looking at it for 30 minutes, we decided we would get the composers who have pieces on the program tonight, just have a chat with them and find out more about their work and what they've been up to and where they're at. So I want to introduce first Dr. Stephen Rice, my colleague here at Penn State. Dr. Rice teaches music technology and composition here with me. And then we have 4 of the 6 composers who are on the program tonight. We'll have another composer joining us right after the concert. We're doing a little session like this again. And so we'll get to meet another composer then. But we have these 4 composers today. And so first, what I want to do is I'm just going to go around and ask each of the composers to briefly introduce themselves and tell us where you are. Tell us where you're at and what you're up to. And then we're going to go back to Oliver Kaplan, whose work we heard by the chamber winds on this first half. And we're going to talk a little bit more with Oliver about that piece. And then we have Susanna, Nick, and Daniel who have pieces on the upcoming half, and I'll ask them to each say a few words about what we're going to hear. So let's start with Oliver. If you'd like to just introduce yourself to everyone, and where are you, and how is life? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I am in Boston, Massachusetts, but I feel like I'm at Penn State. This is an incredible achievement. I mean, it would be on its own an incredible achievement, but to re-envision this festival in a virtual format is a real tour de force, and you all should be proud, and thank you for hosting us, composers. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you so much. Daniel Cueto?
Yeah, hi. I'm also just grateful and thankful to be able to have this conversation, to be able to hear our works virtually, but indeed played live. So it does have that sort of live sense to it, and it's just great to be able to have this amount of community, which is what we can afford now. But it's just really amazing that you guys have put this all together, and we're just really excited to be here.
Great. Where are you, Daniel?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm a doctoral student at Indiana University, so I'm here in Bloomington, Indiana. Yep.
Great. Okay, Nick Shahid.
Hi. Yeah, thanks. This has been incredible so far. Really looking forward to the rest of the festival. Yeah, I'm Nick. I'm currently based in Eugene, Oregon, but that's been a pretty recent move. I was actually in Seattle for a couple years before that, and then Kansas before that. So yeah, looking forward to this.
Great. Susanna Hancock.
Hi, I'm Susanna Hancock. I currently live in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I guess, like everybody else, I've been doing a whole lot of nothing other than writing music, of course.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. So I'm going to hop back over to Oliver here and first ask Oliver, I don't know that everyone tuning in has read or has access to the program notes. We tried to, spread that link around, make sure people had it. But do you want to say a bit about your piece and maybe the circumstances of composing it? A little bit about what, anything you want to say about the piece, anything that might be included in the program notes or even beyond that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say first important thing to know, nature is one of the biggest sources of inspiration for me personally and also for my music. And in this piece, it's kind of I call it like an alpine tone poem. It's a theme and variations. And each of these variations is kind of like a mini tone poem representing some aspect of life in the alpine zone. The title Krumholz Variations, Krumholz is a German word that means crooked wood. And if you're a hiker, kind of when you kind of just start to break out of tree line, you see these really cool, gnarly trees, and those are the Krumholz. I think for me, this piece is kind of a duality because on the one hand, it's a nature piece, but on the other hand, I like this sort of metaphor as, life in the alpine zone is very one of the harshest conditions on the planet. And I think there's, a metaphor there for human resiliency in the face of difficult times, which, so I think this piece for me, even especially right now, comes back again and finding beauty in hard times. And for me, thinking about nature right now, I couldn't have gotten through this past year if it wasn't for green spaces in my community where I've found solace. So that's meant a lot. It does have a quirky instrumentation, as you might have noticed, and it's the same instrumentation as Stravinsky's Octet for winds and brass. And it was commissioned by a consortium of ensembles around the country as a companion piece for that octet. So it's kind of funky, like a lot of Stravinsky instrumentations are. It's this very bottom heavy ensemble, and that was one of the interesting challenges of the commission, was kind of finding my own way through that unique instrumentation.
So Oliver, what does a nature mean to you? You have talked about how it's very important to you in your works, and you talked a little bit about hiking, but it's a very flexible kind of term, and I think it means different things to different people. So what is nature, and what is the connection of nature to this work to you?
Well, that's a very philosophical question. Do you mean how do I define nature, or what does it mean in my heart, or?
Well, I guess I mean that you said that it was important to the piece, and then you would connect it. I was wondering if it connected to your personal experience, like maybe hiking or something like that. But some people think about nature as, as an opposition to you could get philosophical with it and define it if you wanted to. But I wonder more about what it is that is important to you about it, and maybe we'll get to what it is in the process.
I think for me, nature is my closest place to spirituality. If I was going to check a religion box, I would check the spiritual but not religious. But where I feel connected is when I'm in nature, whether that's in the woods on a beach that's not too crowded, but or in a meadow. It's that time outdoors is where I just kind of feel both most myself and most inspired, but also sort of connected to something that's more than me. I don't necessarily think of nature as opposition to people. I'm always very interested in like relationships between people and nature. But certainly this piece in particular draws from I do love to hike a lot. So it draws from my experience in hiking, and I love being on the top of a mountain. It gives me kind of a rush.
Do you compose while you're on one of those hikes, or do you take the experience back and then use it to inform what you're doing?
Oh, that's a great question. Usually more likely than not when I come back, because I'm usually with other people when I'm on a hike. Although I do have, this is kind of, I don't know if this is embarrassing or not. I have a maple wooden fife that I bought when I was a teenager at Colonial Williamsburg. And it's a really good hiking and backpacking instrument because I'm a flute player, and obviously like you don't want to take your fancy flute hiking, but this $20 fife is a great thing to take up a mountain. So I have sat on the top of a mountain with my little like Colonial Williamsburg fife and penned down some melodies.
That's a very poetic image.
Have you written any pieces for that instrument?
I haven't written any pieces I should. No, I have not written any pieces for that instrument. I mean, it's got a very like wooden flute sound to it. So I have written melodies that have gone into my pieces on that instrument as flute melodies, but not directly for it.
The theme of nature in this piece that we heard tonight, is that pretty common among your works? Do you have other pieces that that people at home we could go check out that are along a similar theme?
Yes, so it's not the only like theme in my portfolio, but I do have a lot of other pieces that are nature inspired. I'm actually a member of a group started by composer Nelshaw Cohen called the Landscape Music Composers Network. That's kind of brought together a bunch of composers that have a significant body of work inspired by nature, and we've done some collaborations together. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually working on recording a new album that's 3 pieces inspired by favorite walks in my local area that have kept me going this past year. So it is a recurring theme for sure.
Great. I'm gonna jump over real quick to another composer, and we're gonna hear a little bit about what we have, a piece that's coming up, and what to expect. So on this next half of the concert, you're gonna hear 4 pieces. There is a string quartet, a woodwind quintet, a solo violin piece, and a saxophone quartet. So this half will feature 3 of our student quartets: a graduate woodwind quintet, graduate string quartet, saxophone quartet, and one of our violin professors, Jim Lyon, will play a solo violin piece. So the first piece that we'll hear is Susanna Hancock's piece, Platforms. Susanna, can you, we haven't heard the piece yet, so anything that you would want to say about the piece before we hear it, or anything you want to talk about the circumstances of composing that piece, and maybe working with the group? I mean, did you get to meet with our quartet here and work on the piece with them a little bit, or hear them play it? Could you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, sure. I wrote this piece quite a few years ago now, I guess, in 2015, I want to say. While I was living in New York City, and I was doing my master's at NYU at the time. And I spent a lot of time on subways, or in subway stations, as one does. And, I think when you have like different life experiences, you kind of become a sponge and start to distill these things into your music. So when I was kind of compiling sketches for this piece, I was sitting on a subway platform at one point at like midnight, and I noticed that the most kind of uneasy that I felt in a subway station was actually when nobody was there. And I think that's kind of a unique feeling in New York City, is that there's a noise floor of our tolerance to the hustle and bustle of life that you don't really get when you live in smaller cities. So I was like, why don't I write a piece where basically from the get-go there's kind of a stasis that is like a very busy texture, and I guess for the climax, or for whatever you would call the building up of the piece, is actually like a peeling away of that texture. So basically, there's a point in the middle of the piece where everything kind of ceases, it gets quiet, the motion kind of stops, and then it slowly rebuilds and does other things. So yeah, platforms doesn't really have to do with I don't know, anything too deep and philosophical, but I think it's a good reflection of my life in New York City and like the kinds of things that I was trying to explore during my time there.
You're trying to deflect the question of what is a platform to you ahead of time.
Oh. Yeah, it's like, well, I don't know, spiritually a platform. No,
Yeah.
but
that seems like a very familiar experience to me from Baltimore. I would the time to get nervous would be if you heard nothing. So that's a very interesting idea. I'll be interested to see how that works out.
Yeah, so we have so far the nature piece, and we have the industrial city piece. So this is a good pairing on the console. Susanna, did you get to meet with the graduate quartet here, string quartet, and hear them play your piece at all? And how is the experience of working with an ensemble like this remotely? And we wish you could be here with us and go in the room with the quartet and coach the piece and so forth. But what was that like?
it was good. I did get to meet with the quartet. I also kind of liaised, if that is that a word, with Max Zorin, who was kind of the faculty coach for the string quartet. And so they had various questions about the notation and maybe the style or the sound that I wanted to get out of the ensemble, which I thought was pretty efficient to coordinate by email, and then finally getting to hear it all put together was exciting because I can do it from my home, and I can meet with these people that are hundreds of miles away. And I think, after kind of coordinating before our actual meeting, I was very happy with the way that they played it. The only thing is Zoom's recording quality, as far as, when you have like a very soft texture versus a very loud texture. And depending on the way that someone kind of has their Zoom settings, it could, things can go crazy.
Yeah, we have two great violin professors here at Penn State, and they're both involved in tonight's concert. Max Zorin, who has been the primary coach of the graduate string quartet semester and on Susanna's piece, and of course Jim Lyon, who's performing one of the solo violin piece tonight. Cool. Well, we look forward to hearing the piece. And we'll have more questions, I'm sure, after. Let's go to Daniel Cueto, who is the composer of the Woodwind Quintet. And what would you like to share with us about the piece?
Right. So it's really interesting to hear sort of the sources of inspiration. And I think there's a real diversity tonight of sources of inspiration. I mean, we've gone through nature and then also the hustle and bustle of the city. And I think I have sort of a third angle that is not really any of those. And that just sort of comes to show how interesting it is, how varied these sources of inspiration can be for us composers. So my piece is called Puma. Puma, of course, is a feline of the Andes, and I am Peruvian American. I was born and raised in Lima, in Peru. And so a lot of my music deals with aspects of pre-Hispanic culture, pre-Hispanic iconography and mythology. And the puma was actually a sort of a sacred animal to many pre-Hispanic Andean cultures, sort of the formidable animal of the land, right? And the Incas, which were the last great Andean civilization, actually built their city, their capital city, Cusco, in the shape of a puma. So the main temple was at the head, and the street that would run along the spine was actually called Puma's Spine in Quechua, in the language of the Incas. So they had such great devotion for this animal that they actually designed their capital city in its shape. And so I was fascinated by that. I was thinking, what could this animal possibly have meant to them as a sacred animal? What qualities did they admire so deeply that they would do that? And so I started sort of going through the qualities that the animal has. And the puma, of course, is a very skilled hunter. So it's a very virtuosic animal in the way that it hunts. It's very fast and it's very efficient. And so I started thinking about, I had wanted to write a wind quintet for a long time because I'm a flute player, just like you, Oliver. So I had played in wind quintets a lot. And I just thought that was sort of the showcase type of ensemble for wind instruments, 5 virtuosic instruments, 5 soloists doing their thing. And so I thought that sort of virtuosic aspect of the very skilled hunter would be fascinating to do with 5 very skilled virtuosic soloists. And I also just like sort of the power that the 5 wind instruments together can achieve, the sheer volume that they have. Of course, also an all wind ensemble to me has, in a way, a certain archaic quality. Just the winds, and as far as we know, the pre-Hispanic peoples did not have string instruments. So an ensemble of wind instruments was, for me, and is often, a really good way to sort of try to get connected with that sort of more ancient side of the history of my country, which I'm just so interested in so much of the time. And of course, we have no idea what pre-Hispanic music sounded like. We have some instruments with really fascinating scales, by the way, but we don't have any recordings. We have a lot of visual art. So I started getting inspired with a lot of visual depictions of the Puma to write the piece. And it ended up being, a quite highly virtuosic, quite difficult to play piece, where, of course, in my role as composer, I can write a difficult piece and I don't have to play it. And then it's the ensemble's task to really be challenged and work on. And been in touch with the Center Winds, which is a group which will play it briefly. And it's just amazing. I've been in touch with her, which is the oboist of the group, and she sent me a recording. Should we do this over, or do you prefer a recording? And I've done several rehearsals over Zoom, and as Susanna was saying, it's tricky with the audio. So I said, well, maybe you guys can record it. And they sent me a recording, which was just amazing. I mean, the piece is really actually very hard to play. There's a lot of virtuosic stuff for every instrument. And it's just amazing what a good job they've done with the piece. That you can really tell that they've put their whole heart into it and a lot of hours to it. And so I was really excited to hear that preview, and we worked via email. I gave them a couple of thoughts about mostly character and changes of character, because it's a piece that has a lot of very drastic changes of character. So it was exciting. And one final thing is that a lot of people wonder, there's a lot of lyrical moments in the piece. And sometimes when people hear it, they say, well, why is there this lyrical slow moment? I thought the Puma is this fierce being that's just always hunting. But it turns out that the Puma as an animal is also an animal that tends to be alone. It has a lonesome quality to it. It's not a very sociable animal. And so that, for me, in the process of composition, provided a great backdrop to the sort of more fierce and aggressive parts of the piece, to have these lyrical moments where the Puma is just maybe onto himself, just sort of reflecting in a state of solitude. So you're going to hear a lot of contrasts, a lot of very virtuosic wind playing, and I'm just very excited to hear it myself in a couple of minutes. So
great. I'm excited to hear it too. We have a woodwind quintet in residence here at Penn State that's called the Pennsylvania Quintet, and the quintet is made up of the 5 faculty members, studio faculty members here, who are, of course, stellar performers. And so having that quintet, this professional level quintet here, provides a real model for the student quintets that I'm not surprised to hear that, how good they're playing on your piece and how good they are, because this is a woodwind quintet here is, they see it at the highest level, from their faculty, from their professors who are playing in the Pennsylvania Quintet. And actually the Pennsylvania Quintet served as the committee that selected this piece from the woodwind quintet submissions. So we're happy to hear that piece tonight.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're gonna hear from Nick Shahid, who's composed a saxophone quartet that we will hear in a bit. We will hear it in a moment. The piece is called Moment. So would you like to share anything about that piece, Nick?
Yeah, I guess for context for how the piece came about, I wrote it during my when I was doing my undergrad at the University of Kansas. It was initially written for a reading session with the H2 Quartet, which is a fantastic sax quartet that's sort of based around the Midwest. And I guess speaking of different sources of inspiration here, mine's also quite a bit different from everyone else's. It was not really like externally, I guess, inspired by anything necessarily, but sort of I wanted to sort of use the sort of really clear tone of the saxophone, like of saxophones to it's like explore like pretty chromatic harmonies. And I sort of did this by like the piece is essentially a canon, and it starts with a really simple material, and sort of just runs that simple material through its course, and out of that the sort of language of the piece developed, and I basically I guess structured the piece around, I've sort of like built up this language. Where else do I go with it, and sort of drawing out how I composed it through there.
For all of the non-musicians that might be tuning in, Nick, what is a canon?
Yeah, a canon is sort of a several individual voices or instruments playing at the same time that are playing the same, like basically the same melodic line, but offset in some way. So a lot of canons, it's, you start with one instrument starts on one beat and another one starts playing the same beat later, like Row Row Your Boat is a canon. And mine is a sort of slightly different variation of that. It's an augmentation canon where all of the instruments play the same line.
But one of them is going row.
Yeah, they start at the same time, but one. Yeah, they play a different different lengths of it, and in particular might be some they all play it very slowly, and so like there's a sort of composite rhythm and feeling that comes out of it.
Great, thank you so much. We only have a few minutes here, and I wanted to go back to Oliver here at the end, because you talked about your piece, you talked about your music a little bit. There's something else that you're involved in there in Boston, though, that I think would be really exciting to hear about, which is an organization that I've benefited from, and I think Dr. Rice as well. And so, of course, I'm talking about Juventus. And I wonder if you can tell us about what that is and what you guys have been up to during this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, we're playing a piece of Daniel's in our May 22 concert as well. So, which we found him through a call for scores. But we are a contemporary mixed instrumentation chamber ensemble, and we focus especially towards more emerging voices in the field. And well, I'm sure like you, the pandemic has been, it was a challenging time, but actually it became a really exciting time for us. I think at first it's funny because this is yesterday was the year anniversary of our first virtual program. But when Massachusetts had its first stay-at-home advisory, we, in conjunction with canceling last year's April concert, we quickly launched a new virtual series. It was called Stay Home with Juventus. We literally put it together in 5 days. And for 3 months, every Wednesday night, one of our musicians would perform a solo concert from their home with whatever equipment they had on hand. But we just felt this, I think as artists, that it's really important to stay with the community through a difficult time and give people hope, beauty, a place to reflect something. And after that initial series, we've tried to up our game a little bit. So we've now been live streaming concerts from a recording studio in Boston, and it's CD quality audio. We have feeds from 4 video cameras. It's pretty fun. We do a pre-concert talk. We have an online program book, the whole thing. I would say that you should all come to our concert tomorrow night, except I don't want to draw anybody away from the festival, but you should come to our May 22 concert and hear Daniel's piece on the program. But we've actually, one of the things that's been really moving about this year is we're seeing the largest audience in our 16-year history as an organization. Over 10,000 people have watched our first 3 concerts of this season, which is crazy. And I think also like this festival, one of the silver linings is being able to reach people in broader geographies and make connections around the world.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for doing that work on behalf of all the composers who are benefiting from it, because I know that at least 3 of us here have been involved in the last 15 years or so with that organization. And so that's that's really great to hear that you're moving forward and doing all that work. So we'll be back with a little chat after some more music. So we have the second half of our concert beginning at 8:30 in just a few minutes here. And following that, we have another composer joining us as well to meet and to learn about their music. So thank you all for having this conversation, and thank you at home for tuning in. And we'll see you again in about 30 minutes. Hello, good evening again, or good morning, depending on where you're at. Really excited to have reached the end of the second concert on the first day of the festival here at Penn State. So you heard quite a variety of pieces, and we're really lucky and fortunate to have the composers with us that we can chat with a little bit and talk a little bit about these works that we heard tonight. And so we're going to do things in a little different order. First, there's so many people to thank for making this festival happen. It would take this whole 30-minute period to do that. So I'm going to spread my thanks out over the next couple days. Tonight, there's one person who no one knows is involved in this, because there's always some wizard behind the curtain who's making things happen. And we have a wonderful live streaming person who works here at Penn State, who is the manager of the recital, and his name's Chris Walmark. And Chris has been making all of this happen with the live streaming and shifting to the Zoom conversations and all that stuff. So we want to make sure we thank Chris Walmark and acknowledge this work. The live stream sounds really great. So thank you so much for bringing our work that we've done here on these pieces to the world through the live streaming. We really appreciate it, and it's really great. So I'm going to start. Well, first, we do have a different composer with us who wasn't in the previous session, a composer of the violin piece, Josiah. How are you doing? And so we had everyone kind of just gave a brief introduction, said where they're at and what they've been up to. So would you like to share with us where are you and how are things going?
Hi, I'm Josiah. I'm from California. Right now, it's kind of like our spring break, so I went up to the mountains up in Lake Tahoe. So I'm kind of here just relaxing right now. But I live in Sacramento. I also am a fifth-year grad student at UC Davis, finishing up. And yeah, it's a good program, and I really enjoy it out here.
Great. Well, thanks for being with us, and we enjoyed your violin piece. And I know that Jim Lyon had a good time working on it. It was a real challenge for him. There's a really demanding piece, and he pulled it off great with a great performance. So we're really happy to have you part of this festival. Now that we've heard all the pieces, we might have a little more questions for some of the other composers and some follow-up questions for Oliver. So I'll get things started, and I'm going to talk to Susanna Hancock for a moment, the composer of the string quartet piece, Platforms. That was the first piece on the program. I thought it was a stellar performance. I thought the graduate string quartet was really fantastic, and I'm sure you're happy with that. This is a really textural piece. This is a piece that doesn't have a sense of pulse that, that you can, that might be periodic or something that you might just tap your foot to, right? This is a piece that is about these textures and sounds that are floating, and you see all these different speeds of things happening. I was noticing like different speeds of tremolo happening and taking more or less bow with the tremolo, and I thought all of that added up to this really wonderful texture. So I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about how you imagined all those sounds for this piece, how it got from your imagination to the page so that the performers could execute this. So maybe talk a little about the notation of the piece or anything about the nature of the style of the piece that you found to be challenging to relay to performers.
Sure. I don't know, in all of my music, there's usually kind of two planes or two modes of things that I'm thinking of, and one of them is gradual change, and one of them is abrupt change, of which in Platforms there kind of is between notes that are metered, such as there's quite a few 30-second notes that the violinists are just kind of like, whittling away their bows on. And then there's also these tremolos, which I meant for them to be kind of unmetered and unspecified, so that when a certain performer might come in with the tremolo or come in with the 30-second notes or come in with like a different figure, there's either like a sudden snapping together or a pulling apart. There's also quite a few bow markings, such as solpant, soltasto, molto solpant, molto soltasto, and even at the end, I think I said molto molto sol tasto, which is, and then I said midpoint over the fingerboard, which some of these things are byproducts of me workshopping the piece with a jack quartet. And they are just like incredible players, and sometimes you don't really know how to describe what you want, and they'll say, oh, you mean something like this.
So all of those bow positions that you were just talking about, Susanna, could you put them in sort of layman's terms for people who might not be string players or composers, things like that?
Sure. So sol pont is when a string player might be playing closer to the bridge of their instrument, which gives a much kind of brighter quality to it, brings out a lot of the more upper harmonics, and sol tasto is over the fingerboard more so, which usually brings out a what people would describe as a darker quality. So some people also describe that sound as more close to a clarinet, which I think clarinet usually has darker overtones than the typical like violin or cello sound. And you can really push for extremes. So the normal sol tasto point that a string player might be comfortable with is not necessarily what you want. And you say molto sol tasto or molto molto sol tasto. I've even seen pieces where the string player will play on the other side of a touched note on. So if their finger is here, then they'll bow over here or something like that, just to create these like crazy kind of timbres with the instrument.
Great. We actually have a question from an audience member, Susanna, for you. It says, the use of texture in your piece was very effective. I quickly noted that my perception of time got warped by the slowly shifting textures. Do you feel that the constant noise of New York was music in itself? Additionally, have you ever considered the composition of nonlinear or even algorithmically structured work, either using technology or some sort of systematic process? And says this would be in the context of temporality in your music.
Ooh, those are all good questions. I do think quite a bit about noise as music and about how I can translate sounds or simple concepts from everyday life into music. As far as algorithmic and systematic composition goes, I usually employ some degree of a system in almost all of my pieces. I would say Platforms was maybe 50-50 intuitively composed, and also like there's a certain system to it, but it wasn't stressing over numbers or repeated patterns maybe as much as some of my other music. So with Platforms, I think the kind of the shifting of the time itself was a system, which allowed me to kind of push and pull without having to, I don't know, just the difference between the metered and unmetered things was enough of a system for me to kind of play around with and get under the hood with in this piece.
Great. Thank you. That last question was from Joshua Mallard, who's a composer for the festival, who has a piece on tomorrow night's concert, a trombone choir piece. So going along in concert order here, we heard Puma by Daniel Cueto for woodwind quintet. I want to ask you, because I have students who write woodwind quintets, and I've written a couple of woodwind quintets, and this is a really challenging ensemble to write for in a lot of ways because of the variation in color and the horn, the horn being in there, and there's always questions. So I wonder if you could talk about some of the challenges of writing for woodwind quintet, and maybe some of the ways that you tackled those in composing this piece.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, actually, because the woodwind quintet is really a very strange type of ensemble. It doesn't really have a parallel in sort of the classical chamber ensembles. If you think of a string quartet or a brass quintet, both of those have instruments that sound much more alike, and blending and making a very consistent sonority is much easier if you write a brass quintet piece or a string quartet piece, especially. When you have a wind quintet, you have these 5 very different instruments, and there's definitely a limit to the amount of sort of homogeneous, the homogeneous quality you can have in a sound. And I think for me, the approach was just to treat them as 5 soloists and to really maximize the variety of timbres. So not try to make it behave like a, you know, an ensemble that's actually going to sound like a unified meta instrument, so to speak, but just to try to use the 5 colors and max differences and the variety of timbres. You just take what you have, take that strength, which is maximum heterogeneity, really. I mean, just as diverse as possible, palette of that, and you maximize that, because that's what the wind quintet can offer. And so the typical thing is that there are 5 soloists and that the parts are virtuosic for each instrument. So that's another thing to really exploit, is to really give hard, you know, parts that are both accompaniment but also often solo for each of the 5 instruments, where they can each show just how virtuosic they are. And that, I think that was sort of my way of getting to the heart of the strengths of the ensemble, which is, as you say, it's tricky because it's not what you would do if you write a string quartet or a brass quintet or anything like that. So it's a different mindset, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say, you know, treating it like 5 soloists, because I hear that in the piece. And it really worked nice. I mean, it's 5 soloists, though, who become kind of intertwined, right? And are relying on each other in a lot of ways to accomplish the musical surface of the piece. That's a really interesting way to think about it.
Right. I mean, I think counterpoint, right? So multiple melodic lines going simultaneously is a thing that works really well with a wind quintet. You know, they're all strong melodic players. And so that's one way of doing it. Yeah, definitely.
Great. To be sure we get around to everyone, I'm going to go to Josiah Catalan. And we enjoyed your violin piece, like I said before. I'm curious, are you a string player, and or did you work very closely with a violinist to get all the really specific kind of techniques and sounds that you wanted to have happen in this piece?
So I'm pretty lucky. I'm actually a violinist, out of practice violinist at this point. But yeah, I mean, I understand the violin pretty well and the technique of it. So I think that was an advantage I had going into writing this piece. And I also got to work closely with the person who premiered it and who's played it, Miranda Cuxon, who's an amazing musician. And yeah, she was able to kind of pick it up and just kind of read it and play it really well. And we kind of collaborated a little bit, but mostly with this piece, I tried to stay more on the practical side within violin technique, almost kind of looking at it as some kind of etude or moto perpetuo. And yeah, it's kind of a fun little piece because lately, you know, with my string music, I've been really interested in kind of trying to exploit a lot of the timbral possibilities of the violin, whether it comes from natural harmonics or just harmonic pressure, you know. And you also get a lot of really interesting sounds from, you know, just placing harmonic pressure points on certain parts of the instrument, you know, and you can kind of get these funky overtones or kind of like false overtones as well. And I think within the piece, I wasn't so worried about being very specific about where those nodes were, but mixing in natural harmonics with harmonic finger pressure that wasn't actual real harmonics, and it kind of creates this overall scintillating texture.
Do you work with electronics? Do you write electronic music, computer music?
I have. It's not, you know, my main medium, but I have worked with electronic music in the past. For sure, I've used Macs, kind of done some just processing or live processing as well. But is this kind of like related to, I think someone put like granular synthesis, and I kind of put that in my score as well, as like granular synthesis bow, you know, it's kind of like that too.
So you put that in the score?
I think, yeah,
Yeah.
Steven wrote that, but I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking about
I think it
something
is in the
similar.
score. Yeah, it's like
Wow.
I think it's in the performance notes, like a granular synthesis.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. That piece, it explores a much wider timbre world or sound world than an ordinary violin piece. Not just much wider. It's extreme. And so I was kind of thinking when we were listening to it, like, oh, I wonder if this composer works with electronics a lot, and you're reproducing some of those things that you've experienced with electronics on a violin. So I thought it was pretty effective. And so if you wrote granular synthesis bow in the score, then that explains it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I think some of that influence has come from electronic music, also other composers using things like stutter bow. I think Andrew Norman has used kind of like a shiver bow as well in some of his music too. And my teacher has kind of used it and advocated for it as well, and something that I've kind of messed around with. But I have to say, if you do put it in your piece, make sure that the performer is totally cool with it, because it could totally mess up their shoulder. Because it's definitely counterintuitive to what the training is, because you're supposed to stay nice and loose and relaxed, where when you're doing like a stutter or granular synthesis bow, you really have to tense up your shoulder, and you could damage yourself if you do too much. So be wary about using it, depending on who's performing your piece.
Yeah, well, thanks for sending your piece to us too and sharing it with us.
Thank you for playing it, and yeah, thanks to Jim Lyon for playing it too.
Yeah. So we have the saxophone canon composer next, Nick Shahid. One thing that really stands out about your piece to me is the consistency of the texture and the slowly moving and shifting harmonic language. Is that something that you think other pieces of yours that you identify with, like other pieces of yours, this kind of slow moving harmonic texture, or is this really specific to this piece?
Yeah, I think my some of my other music does explore that. I think this sort of took it to a bit of an extreme, and was sort of trying to explore that and just see. It sort of like comes out of I like to work with really, I guess, small amounts of material and sort of see how far I can take it. And in this case, it was sort of like a lot of really long notes that are doing just a couple leaps, and seeing sort of what resulted out of that, and sort of building the piece out of that process.
The interlocking thing that you mentioned, Nick, was apparent too. How much of a puzzle was it to figure out the right ratios to get your melodic lines to play at, so that they would sort of be playing off of one another rather than happening at the same time?
It wasn't necessarily sort of a lot of focus on that when I was making it. Sort of I would say I was just sort of like basically sort of just set up a process, and then sort of like this and really what I thought was a really interesting texture came out of it, and I sort of just let that go for a while. Eventually it kind of stopped working, and then I sort of retroactively adjusted the end of it to sort of fit within the language that had been built up already since like the start of the piece.
That makes sense. We've kind of gone around the circle of composers with these formal ideas where people were talking about inspiration a bit in the beginning. And Oliver's piece, he mentioned the landscape composers, and there are a lot of really sustained harmonies in the piece, and also it works with a variations form. And I don't know if no one has talked about that this evening. Wonder, Oliver, if you could just talk about what it was like to compose in a variations form, what that is, and maybe about sort of longer time scale kinds of things that I think might be going on in your music.
Sure. So a theme and variation starts with some kind of smaller musical idea. So it might be 30 seconds or a minute. And then you take that idea and you make a variation, and hence the name, but you do something different with it. And then you do something different with it again and again and again. And it can be kind of playful, actually. There's a long like tradition of composers and themes and variations, but the idea is that some of these will be closer to the theme and you can see a clear connection, and then some of them will become very far from the theme, such that at first listen you might be like, I don't even see how like A relates to Z, but underneath the surface, maybe you took the rhythm was the same and it was underpinning, or you took some kind of chordal figure and you turned it upside down or something like that. So there's this sort of, I think, this dramatic tension between the theme and how it evolves across the piece.
And what was the sort of kernel of your theme that you were working with?
Oh, you're getting me on the spot because the piece is not new, but the theme is here I'm pulling up the score really quickly while we're talking.
I guess I just mean that there are theme and variations that work off of a bass line, and there's ones that work off a series of harmonies, and there's ones that work off of a melody, and there's even more variations than that. So I wonder how your piece fits into that broader structure that you just
the harmony is a big developed element of my theme, and there's this major minor tug that kind of is like in the initial theme and that plays out throughout the piece, and then you get to the restatement of the theme at the end. You start with dawn and the last variation is dusk, and there's like final chords. There's a little back and forth. To me, it's like, is it going to settle a major? Is it going to settle minor? And then it ends with this dark chord. I zoomed into a rehearsal with the musicians last week too, when we were talking about making it kind of deliciously dark and, leaning into that. And I do think, I'm not saying I'm that unique, right? There's lots of pieces out there that have done that kind of tension. I think more often than not, those pieces tend to resolve major. I don't know if I can back that up there, but anyway, I went for the dark end.
It was a surprise.
Yeah, so we're kind of talking about pitch language a little bit here, and we're getting into that. I note that we only have 5 minutes left, and there are 5 composers, and so we're going to go back around the other way, and we're going to start with Oliver here. And what I noticed about all your pieces, as a collective on this concert, is that the way pitch is treated is so different. We have things from like triadic harmony, functional tonality, to non-pitched based timbres. And so I thought we'll start with Oliver, and I wonder what are some ways that you think about pitch in music, or what are some of your main influences in the kind of pitch language that you use? I know your music tends to be more tonal, and so I wonder if I'd like each composer to say something about this a little bit, because we have such a diverse approach to pitch language in all the pieces that we heard.
I'm definitely a melodist. I like a good melody. Sometimes it often is tonal, but sometimes it seems tonal, but maybe isn't exactly, like it has a consonant sound, but the key, sometimes there's sort of just a floating between keys that I like to do too. And I also like, in addition to, the more standard major and minor scales too, I do like to dabble in modal, scales too. And I guess with that said, composers who are big influences on me, so Vaughan Williams is one, so hence the modal influence. But Aaron Copland is a big favorite, and then I guess a lot of 20th century romantics. I mean, definitely love Bartok, Stravinsky, Ravel, Debussy, composers like that. I like color in music too; it's very important to me.
Favorite Vaughan Williams piece?
Oh, The Lark Ascending.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Daniel likes that.
So how about you, Nick?
Oh, that is such an amazing piece. It's so cool that I just love.
Okay, yeah. Pitch language. I like contrast. I know that kind of seems weird given it's kind of like that piece is sort of a homogeneous texture, but especially with like the pitch language in that piece, it was sort of constantly moving in and out of, basic triads and intervals into like more complex chromatic chords. And that sort of also extends to a lot of what I do. I mostly do electronic music right now, and a lot of that sort of is a mix of like, basic like simple chordal textures mixed with like noise and distortion feedback and that type of stuff. So I like sort of moving between the two and like sort of present them both together.
Do you find in general the way that you think about pitch or treat pitch in your electronic music is different than in your acoustic compositions, such as your chamber music?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to like, I guess, go crazy and find like put together a huge amount of things together at the same time. So I sort of like to lean into that.
Yeah. How about you, Josiah?
I have I wouldn't say complicated relationship with pitch, but as I've kind of moved through a lot of my different phases in music, starting off in the beginning of my undergrad where a lot of my music was very pitch centric because, I was very into like Bartok and Messiaen and, loved having melodies. And when I came to UC Davis in the beginning, then I kind of started shifting away from pitch centric music and focusing a lot more on timbre, kind of more of these soundscapes for lack of a better word. But now as I've gotten kind of comfortable again with, integrating harmony back into my music, probably not more as much as with this piece that you just heard, but, I've kind of come back to using scales, modal harmony, but definitely take more of an intuitive approach to it, less rigorous. And, I love using pitch too, but I also like giving myself the freedom to not have to focus on it on some pieces as well. So that's kind of how I treat pitch.
Great. Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear this from everyone, especially I know we have a lot of like student composers who are on the feed and so forth, and it can be confusing when you're a young composer and you're seeing like all these different things that are happening. But I think what we take away from this is like you can do all of these things. You can write tonal music. You can write music that's timbre based, and everything kind of in between. So it's really interesting. We have Daniel's next. Then the squares aren't in the order of the concert, so it mixes me up.
Yeah. So I think I'm a lot like Oliver, that I really think in terms of lines a lot. I'm really a melodic person, sort of in my musical logic when I think up music. And when I wrote Puma, I was really sort of obsessed with symmetrical scales. These are scales that have a pattern that keep repeating, right? So the octatonic scale is really present in that piece, right? The hexatonic, or sometimes called augmented scale, is also in there a lot. And especially the more virtuosic parts have a lot of octatonic, hexatonic sort of mixed together. And the more lyrical chorale-like parts are really very modal. So there's a lot of Dorian and Aeolian in there. So that seemed like it worked well in that piece to have the calmer moments in a little bit calmer tonal places and pitch places with these modes that give something archaic, something old to the feeling, and the quicker parts in these more dissonant scales. So that was definitely my approach at that point. And since then, I've still used a lot of octatonic, hexatonic, and mixtures, but I've also in the last few years rediscovered sort of the power of major and minor again. So that's been kind of interesting too. And it's an evolving process. You discover these pitch languages or these pitch collections, and you become obsessed with them as a composer, and you write a lot with those, and then you go on to sort of another place, and then maybe to no pitch land for a while, as some composers are saying. So it's always a discovery, I think, pitch-wise for us as composers.
Great. And Susanna, do you want to say something about the pitch language, either in that piece or just in general in your music, things that you've been interested in exploring, and then we will wrap it up?
Sure. I'll try to give a lightning round. In platforms, there's basically kind of two chords or two sets of pitch material that are kind of being oscillated between and kind of interlocking and things like that. And I am one of those people that has a very high tolerance for a chord or a sound or whatever, and I want to explore it to its fullest extent. But I really kind of think of pitch or harmony in terms of like a gradient or a spectrum. You know, I want to be able to move between full consonance and full dissonance. And, you know, in my pieces, I usually think about pitch in terms of underpinnings, like where are the important moments in my piece and how can I maybe manipulate my harmonic material in a very gradual way that takes me from point A to point B and, you know, stops at very interesting points along the way. But I think taking a very like fractal approach to pitch material is another way that I usually like to structure my pieces in a way that's logical, and I can basically build myself a box that I can then move within and do as I so please.
Great. Once again, thanks to all of you for sending your music into us, and I'm really, really thrilled that we could program this with, you know, performers on the stage. We wish you were here with us, but this is the next best thing, being able to at least still chat and get together this way. So thanks again. Congratulations to all of you on your awesome pieces and on the great performances tonight. Thanks one more time to Chris Walmark for all the streaming mastery and audio and video work. And we will see you for day 2 tomorrow. 9:30, there's a research presentation. 1 o'clock, there's a concert. 3 o'clock, there's a research presentation. And 7:30, there is another concert here. So thank you again.